Hi folks, this is Dr. Robin and I'm back for a new episode of K-Pop Science EDU. Today we're going to answer the question, what is stuff made out of? Now this is a pretty important question and my students tend to like this topic because it explains something really fundamental. And once you understand that stuff, which we're going to refer to as matter, is made up of atoms and molecules, it can help you understand other things as well. To get started, we're going to watch a short clip from Run BTS episode 46. Now some locals, people who don't usually watch K-pop content, have told me that parts of this clip are a little bit tricky to understand. So I wanted to explain a few things for those of you who might not be used to the chaos of K-pop subtitles. Now, one of fans' favorite things about K-pop content is the way it's produced. Of course, we love our idols, but the teams supporting the idols are really equally as amazing. And one of our favorite things that production teams do is add editorial comments. So if you're reading the subtitles, you might notice that sometimes some of the subtitles are in parentheses or brackets. These are the subtitles explaining the editorial comments that the editors have added in Korean on the screen. Now, you don't always need to understand these editorial comments in order to understand the conversation, but they do usually add some context and fun to the scene. For example, in the subtitles here, Jin asks, what happens if it breaks? And the editors have added on screen in the yellow font, already worried, to explain how Jin is feeling. So if you can't read so much so fast, pause the video. I read English very, very quickly, and I've been reading this type of content for a few years, and I still often need to stop and go back to make sure I get everything. So like I tell my students, set yourself up for success. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, let's watch the clip.
자, 이게 오늘 사용될 백자토예요. 얘를 이제 어떤 형태를 만들어서 한 3일에서 5일 정도 건조를 하게 되면 이 상태가 돼요.
그럼 저희가 오늘 만들어도 오늘 가져갈 수가 없겠군요.
네, 그리고 보통 한 1250도에서 한 번 더 구워지면 최종 완성이 돼요.
1250도.
네.
일단 깨지면 어떡하나요?
아, 네,
깨지는구나. 내 마음도 같이 깨지는구나. 그러면
어떻게 해요? 뭐 먹을 거예요?
아, 그렇지. 어쩔 수 없지.
뭔가 보니까 한 5개는 깨지지 않겠냐?
5일 뒤에 받았는데 다 깨져 있어요. 자, 작품입니다. 다 깨져 있어요.
와장창.
그런데 오늘 주의하실 점이 도자기를 흙을 만들 때 절대로 이렇게 흙이 겹쳐지게 작업을 하시면 안 돼요. 공기가 팽창을 하면서
깨지는
얘가 혼자 깨지면 상관이 없는데요. 폭탄처럼 터져버려요. 얘는 그냥 버리시면 돼요.
한번 겹쳐지면.
네네네, 겹쳐져 버렸어.
In the clip, the teacher warns them that their pieces could explode in the kiln if they leave some air between the layers of clay. To understand why this is, we need to understand that stuff, or matter, including air, is made up of atoms and molecules. So here's what it would look like if you could zoom in really close on a solid sample of oxygen, a liquid sample of oxygen, and a gas sample of oxygen. These red double circles are the oxygen molecules. So as you can see in the solid, the molecules are vibrating in place and are very close together. In the liquid, they start to move a bit more and get farther apart. And in the gas, which is how we usually interact with oxygen, the molecules are moving very quickly and are very far apart from each other. They're so far apart from each other that we can't see anything. So it's important to note that the molecules themselves are exactly the same in the solid, the liquid, and the gas. The difference between a solid, liquid, and gas is how fast the molecules are moving and how far apart they are from each other. We're using oxygen as an example here, but all substances are made of molecules. The type of molecule determines the substance. We'll see more about this in a minute. So we know whether a substance is a solid, liquid, or gas is based on how fast its molecules are moving and how close together they are. But what determines that about the molecules? Well, that depends on how much energy they have, and we refer to that energy as heat. So as you add heat energy to molecules, just like giving sugar to toddlers, they gain energy, they speed up, and they get farther apart. Then as you remove the heat energy from the molecules, they slow down and they get closer together. When I start explaining this in class, I usually stand up in front of the class and say, look, I'm a molecule in a solid. And I start moving a little bit more and say, look, I'm a molecule in a liquid. And then I start running all over the place and say, I'm a molecule in a gas. Now, I started doing this before I knew about BTS, but now that I do know about BTS, I usually always think about Yoongi's silly dances. And I would say he's probably somewhere between a molecule in a solid and a molecule in a liquid. What do you think? Okay, so how can we look at the molecules of a substance in a bit more of a detailed way than me and Yoongi dancing? Well, lucky for us, the University of Colorado at Boulder has this amazing PhET simulation in which they show us what do the molecules of different substances look like at different temperatures and in the solid phase, the liquid phase, and the gas phase. So let's check it out. We've got oxygen. I've set it to oxygen molecules because you guys are now experts in oxygen molecules. And if we click on solid, it shows us, okay, what are the oxygen molecules in the solid form doing? Well, as you can see, they're vibrating in place and they are really close together. If we switch this then to liquid, they start moving a little bit more and they start getting a little farther apart. And then in the gas, they are moving much more quickly and they've got much farther apart from each other. Then let's see what heat does to this. Switch it back to the solid. And we're going to add our heat energy. The molecules are gaining that energy, so they're going to start moving more and they're going to get farther and farther apart. And as we see, it shifts from looking like a solid through a liquid, and now we're pretty much looking at a gas. If we reverse that and remove heat energy, in other words, we're going to make it colder, we're going to be removing that energy. The molecules are going to be getting slower and slower, and they're going to be getting closer and closer together until they are finally back into the solid form. So again, let's think of the BTS members as molecules. Here's the beginning of a live performance of I'm Fine, where I would say they start as molecules in a solid because they're close together and aren't moving very much. And then they kind of start moving farther apart and moving more quickly, so they're moving into becoming a liquid. And then they shift to moving very quickly and being very far apart, so then they're in a gas. What do you guys think? Now, what does this have to do with exploding pottery? The teacher told them not to put the clay in layers because the air between the layers could expand when heated and eventually cause the piece to explode. Now, from what I've read, some people say it's the water molecules in the wet clay that expand that cause the problem versus the gas particles in the air. But either way, the concept is the same. As the pottery is heated up, the molecules start moving more quickly and getting farther apart from each other. This increases the pressure that could eventually cause the piece to explode. So let's go back to the PhET simulation and check this out in more detail. In the phase changes version of the simulation, you can see how much pressure is exerted by molecules in this enclosed container by looking at the pressure gauge up in the left corner. Now this is perfect for our pottery example because the space between layers of clay is like an enclosed container. We're going to start with water molecules at room temperature, which is about 20 degrees Celsius. Note that we're looking at water here and that the water molecules are different than the oxygen molecules we used before. At room temperature, the pressure from the water molecules is reading 0 atmospheres. Atmospheres is a unit to measure pressure, and 0, there isn't much going on right now. So now watch what happens when we increase the temperature from room temperature to 1,250 degrees, which is the kiln's temperature. So as the temperature increases, the molecules start moving around faster and getting farther apart. But they can't get out, so they're hitting the sides of the container with greater force. I'm going to speed this up so we aren't sitting here forever, but keep an eye on the pressure gauge. In this simulation, by the time we get to the kiln's temperature of 1,250 degrees, the pressure increases to about 50 atmospheres. Okay, but what does 50 atmospheres mean? Is that even a lot? Let's look at this 2021 study by Kirschman and colleagues as an example. In the study, they measured the blast pressure of some firecrackers to be about 0.987 atmospheres. So basically, firecrackers exploding is about 1 atmosphere. In our container, we've got 50 atmospheres. So yes, 50 atmospheres is a lot. Now please note that I don't think this value is directly related to how much pressure would build up between layers of clay because it would depend on the size of the space and the number of water and gas molecules inside. But I hope you can see how heating up water and gas molecules between the clay layers would increase the pressure and risk an explosion. Okay, now that you understand all of that, most importantly, you can now understand the Science Geek t-shirt that I'm wearing. So in English, we have this saying, and for those of you who speak other languages and know other cultures, I would love it if you would tell me if you also have a similar saying. So the saying has to do with how someone views a glass that is half filled with water. So an optimist will say that the glass is half full. A pessimist will say the glass is half empty. And a scientist will say, technically, the glass is completely full. Now, of course, it has to do with there are molecules in the liquid and there are molecules in the gas. And that is it. As always, I will list all the references I used on the next slide and in the video description. Please let me know if you have any questions or suggestions. I look forward to our next lesson. Until then, keep listening and keep learning. 감사합니다.